Welcome back to the Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit in
the mainstream sports media thought they could control the narrative forever, but the dam just completely broke on live national television. When Stephen A. Smith finally lost his composure on ESPN, he didn't just critique a game. He tore down the carefully constructed wall of silence surrounding the Wnba. For years, executives and legacy commentators kept quiet about internal favoritism, buried controversies, and questionable behavior to protect their polished image. But the sudden surge in mainstream viewership exposed every single crack in the foundation. Fans began noticing that certain players received absolute protection, regardless of what happened on or off the court, while others were penalized simply for speaking their minds. The boiling point arrived when Stephen A. Smith openly called out the hypocritical treatment of league stars, setting off a chain reaction that brought hidden histories straight into the spotlight. And what unfolded next shattered the unwritten rules of sports broadcasting forever. To understand how deep this narrative rift goes, you have to look at how different players are treated when they make waves in the league. Enter Sophie Cunningham, a player who has quickly become one of the most polarizing and fiercely debated figures in women's basketball. Cunningham isn't afraid of physical play, nor is she afraid of embracing her personality off the court. While traditional media outlets tried to paint her as a distraction, fans rallied around her as a breath of fresh air. She became the unofficial enforcer, willing to step up on the hardwood when dirty plays went unchecked by referees. When physical altercations escalated on the court and younger marquee players were repeatedly targeted with hard fouls, Cunningham was often the only one stepping in to defend them. Yet, instead of being praised for her toughness, she faced a wall of media criticism and quick whistle penalties. The double standard was undeniable, leaving millions of viewers asking why her aggressive style was vilified while others got away with far worse. But the real outrage was only just beginning to build behind closed doors. The sudden media war over Sophie Cunningham exposed a deeper pattern of selective outrage within the league. While the media dragged certain outspoken players through the mud for minor infractions or court antics, they quietly buried scandals involving their most protected superstars. Chief among those stories is the heavily sanitized background of Brittney Griner. While newer fans recognize her primarily for her international legal nightmare and subsequent return to the United States, veteran sports journalists remember a very different story from 2015 that the league worked endlessly to erase from public consciousness. Prior to her rise as an untouchable sports icon, Griner was involved in a serious domestic dispute with her then-spouse, former Wnba player Glory Johnson. Both players were arrested at their home in Goodyear, Arizona, on assault and disorderly conduct charges after police were called to break up a physical altercation that left both women with visible injuries. The Wnba eventually issued 7-game suspensions, but as the years went on and Griner's global profile expanded, the sports media ecosystem systematically stopped mentioning the incident altogether. But that wasn't the whole story. The complete erasure of Griner's past created a glaring double standard that Stephen A. Smith couldn't ignore any longer. As legacy media outlets pushed a squeaky clean narrative for their preferred stars, Smith went on air and exposed the stark contrast in how incidents are reported. While non-mainstream players were labeled liabilities for viral off-court moments or physical play, figures like Griner were shielded from tough questions by sports networks terrified of losing access. Smith pointed out that this selective protectionism wasn't just unfair, it was actively destroying the credibility of the sport. His on-air clashes with fellow panelists became legendary, as he openly accused the network apparatus of running defense for a league that refused to hold everyone to the same standard. When commentators tried to shut him down, Smith doubled down, emphasizing that fans aren't blind and can see through corporate posturing. His public outburst blew the lid off the agreement to keep quiet, forcing mainstream audiences to confront the hidden dynamics driving the Wnba's internal politics. And what happened next would shock everyone following the debate. As the tension reached a boiling point on national television, the focus shifted back to the court, where the physical reality of the sport could no longer be hidden by PR campaigns. Viewers began compiling video evidence showing clear instances of extreme physicality, targeting high-profile rookies and outspoken personalities, contrasted with soft calls given to legacy figures. Sophie Cunningham found herself right in the crosshairs of this physical war, frequently targeted by opposing teams and penalized harshly whenever she retaliated. Fans started the viral Defend Sophie movement across social media platforms, highlighting how the league's officiating appeared heavily biased depending on who was involved in the play. While dirty plays against new stars were routinely downgraded from flagrant fouls to simple personal fouls, minor scuffles involving protected stars resulted in immediate ejections and heavy fines for their opponents. This visible disparity fueled growing public anger, convincing modern fans that the league's establishment was actively protecting its old guard, at the expense of fairness and common sense. But the corporate pushback was about to get even harsher. Rather than addressing the underlying bias and officiating inconsistencies, the league doubled down on controlling the public image. Players who dared to question referee decisions or mention the double standards during post-game press conferences were met with swift financial penalties and subtle media blacklists. Despite the pressure to stay silent, the outrage only grew stronger among the fan base, who flooded game streams and comment sections demanding accountability. Stephen A. Smith continued to press the issue, arguing that insulating protected players from legitimate critique, while silencing figures like Cunningham, was driving away the very audience the league claimed it wanted to attract. By treating certain athletes as untouchable while demonizing others for showing grit and personality, the sport created an unsustainable cultural divide that threatened to derail its explosive financial growth. The narrative walls had officially crumbled, exposing a deep institutional conflict that could no longer be swept under the rug. The explosion of interest in women's basketball was supposed to be a victory lap for the front office, but instead, it lit a fuse on a decades-old culture war. For years, the league operated in a quiet vacuum, where a small group of journalists and executives set the tone, decided who got promoted, and determined who was protected. When millions of new fans flooded in, bringing fresh eyes and unbiased perspectives, they didn't buy into the pre-packaged narratives. They saw non-calls on blatant physical fouls, odd commentary framing on major broadcasts, and an overwhelming push to elevate certain personalities while downplaying others. When Stephen A. Smith stepped up to his microphone on First Take, he gave voice to what millions of fans were typing on social media every single night. He dared to ask why veteran players seemed visibly resentful of the massive television ratings driven by high-profile newcomers, and why media members were lecturing viewers on how they were allowed to consume the sport. That single segment shattered the polite consensus, turning internal sports politics into a massive public showdown. As the debate intensified, commentators who had long held the keys to the narrative began circling the wagons. They claimed that outside media figures like Stephen A. Smith didn't understand the culture of the league and had no right to question how business was conducted. But that argument fell completely flat with audiences who saw right through the deflection. Viewers started looking back at past coverage and noticed how quickly severe off-court incidents involving legacy stars were brushed aside, while minor trash talk or physical fouls by non-favored players generated days of outrage. The handling of Brittney Griner's early career troubles stood as the ultimate example of this unspoken protection program. When Griner was drafted, she was positioned as the future of the league, a generational talent designed to elevate the Wnba's global standing. When her 2015 domestic violence arrest with Glory Johnson made national news, it threatened to undermine that massive corporate investment. The league stepped in with a brief suspension, but as soon as the news cycle moved on, a collective decision was made across major broadcast partners to bury the story deep in the archives. Compare that absolute wall of protection with how players like Sophie Cunningham are treated by the media machine today. Cunningham came into the league with an unyielding, intense competitive drive, refusing to back down from established superstars or shy away from physical encounters. When she defended her teammates on the court, highlight reels framed her as overly aggressive or dirty, while legacy veterans engaging in identical physical play were praised for their veteran leadership and competitive fire. This obvious double standard didn't sit right with modern fans. Online communities began documenting every instance where Cunningham was whistled for minor contact, while opposing players were allowed to throw elbows and make dangerous plays without receiving so much as a whistle. The Defend Sophie hashtag wasn't just a trend. It became a rallying cry for viewers fed up with obvious referee bias and selective media outrage. The narrative was spinning out of control, and league executives were scrambling to figure out how to reclaim narrative dominance. Behind the scenes, the pressure on network executives reached an all-time high. Producers on major sports networks were reportedly urged to tone down discussions regarding officiating bias and player jealousy, with calls to pivot back to traditional, sanitized storylines. But Stephen A. Smith refused to play along with the scripted talking points. On episode after episode, he brought up the awkward reality of player rivalries, the clear jealousy surrounding charter flights and endorsement deals, and the refusal of certain veterans to give credit where credit was due. He challenged his own co-hosts live on air, asking why they were so eager to defend systemic flaws rather than calling out bad officiating and narrative protectionism. The arguments became so intense that clips of ESPN panels went viral across TikTok and Twitter, garnering tens of millions of views from people who had never watched a full WNBA game before. The narrative curtain had been ripped away, and there was no going back. The contrast between how the establishment handled legacy superstars versus rising personalities exposed a deep philosophical rift inside women's sports. On one side stood the traditionalists, who believed the league's public image needed to be tightly controlled, sanitizing player histories and enforcing a strict hierarchy of respect based on seniority. On the other side stood the modern fans and outspoken media figures, who demanded real authenticity, equal accountability, and an end to protected status for favored stars. When Griner returned to action after her detainment in Russia, the media apparatus went into overdrive to present her as a heroic, flawless figurehead, brushing aside any historical context that didn't fit the heroic comeback narrative. But when players like Cunningham expressed genuine frustration with how games were being called or how rookies were being treated on the court, they were met with public reprimands and swift league fines. This stark contrast made it overwhelmingly clear that the rules were far from equal. What made the situation even more chaotic was the sheer speed at which fans began cross-referencing past league statements with current actions. Social media sleuths started unearthing old press releases, contrasting the heavy-handed discipline handed down for minor post-game comments with the absolute silence surrounding major legal and personal infractions by legacy superstars. Viewers noted that when protected players engaged in court fights or technical fouls, broadcast teams laughed it off as fiery passion. But when Cunningham or other non-favored players stood their ground, broadcast teams openly questioned their composure. This transparent framing backfired spectacularly on the league's PR department. Instead of forcing fans to accept the preferred stars, it turned Cunningham into a folk hero for an army of viewers who felt the establishment was insulting their intelligence. Every single fine levied against an outspoken player only added more fuel to the fire. As the ratings continued to soar, the tension on the court reached a fever pitch. In several high-profile matchups, physical play escalated to dangerous levels, with veteran players delivering hard hits to star rookies, while official referees stood by and watched. When Cunningham intervened to protect her teammates from dirty fouls, the media immediately shifted the blame onto her, accusing her of escalating violence on the court. But replay analysis posted by sports creators showed a very different picture. Cunningham was reacting to uncalled physical hits that could have caused serious injuries to young stars. Fans began calling out commentators in real time, pointing out that the media was actively gaslighting the audience to protect veteran players who were using physical intimidation to make up for skill gaps. The breaking point had officially arrived, and the league's PR machine was running out of moves. Stephen A. Smith captured the frustration of millions when he pointed out that no other professional sports league operates under such fragile, hyper-protected conditions. In the NBA, NFL, or MLB, players are held accountable for their past actions. Off-court legal issues are discussed openly, and bad officiating is torn apart by analysts every single night. Yet inside the Wnba broadcast bubble, commentators were expected to act like cheerleaders rather than journalists. Smith demanded to know why female athletes were being treated with soft gloves by a sports media apparatus that refused to cover them with the same grit, realism, and critical analysis applied to men's sports. By treating the league as something that needed to be shielded from real journalism, the establishment was actually holding the sport back from reaching true mainstream legitimacy. That argument resonated deeply with sports fans who were tired of being lectured on how to feel about players. The silence surrounding Brittney Griner'S 2015 domestic violence charges became the ultimate symbol of this media shield. When the incident originally occurred, both Griner and Glory Johnson were arrested after a physical confrontation at their home, leading to court-ordered anger management and a mandatory suspension from the league. But as the Wnba sought to expand its global imprint and brand partnerships, references to this event were scrubbed from broadcast backgrounds, press kits, and promotional materials. Whenever Griner was interviewed, reporters were strictly guided away from asking about her past legal troubles or the circumstances surrounding her domestic arrest. When non-mainstream media outlets brought up the incident, they were accused of attacking the league or trying to tear down a prominent figure. This deliberate narrative shielding created an environment where certain athletes operated with absolute immunity from public scrutiny, while others were subject to relentless media attacks for basic court interactions. This system of protected status directly fueled the rise of the Defend Sophie movement. Fans realized that if the media was going to actively shield favored players while vilifying tough, unapologetic athletes like Cunningham, the audience had to step in and balance the scales. Social media platforms were flooded with highlight reels showing Cunningham's defensive plays, her court leadership, and her unfiltered post-game interviews where she refused to follow corporate PR scripts. Viewers praised her for being authentic, tough, and willing to embrace the villain role assigned to her by biased legacy broadcasters. The more the establishment tried to downplay her impact or hit her with subtle fines, the more her popularity skyrocketed among modern sports fans. She became the symbol of resistance against a sports media machine that demanded total conformity from its players. The corporate media hierarchy quickly realized that their old tactics were backfiring. For decades, traditional sports networks could control which players were loved and which were hated, simply through broadcast framing and commentary angles. But in the era of viral clip sharing and independent sports analysis, fans could analyze every angle of a play within seconds of it happening live. When broadcast commentators attempted to justify a dirty play against a star rookie or frame Cunningham's defensive response as problematic, thousands of independent creators uploaded high-definition slow-motion breakdowns, proving the broadcast narrative was completely false. The legacy media lost its monopoly on truth, and Stephen A. Smith was one of the few mainstream anchors brave enough to acknowledge this reality on national television.